Joining me today is Graham Lyons, and we're going to be talking about a whole range of things. He's an interesting chap, very diverse background, and has got a few things to say about where this country and the world's going. So I'd like to welcome Graham to the program, and perhaps start, Graham, by getting you to tell us a bit about yourself and your background.
Thanks, Campbell. It's a privilege to be on your program. I was originally a cattle breeder and farmer till I was in my mid-40s, and then looked for something else to do with my life, and went back to uni, studied public health and epidemiology, public health nutrition, etc., and causes of disease, and then did a PhD on micronutrients and things like selenium, zinc, iodine, vitamin A, and means of rectifying deficiencies in those in populations which are deficient via the food system, not via injections and tablets.
So this was coming out of farming, not out of any particular interest in human biology per se?
Yes, although I've always been interested in such things, biochemistry, etc. I'm could be characterised as a truth seeker, I guess. That's my rationale, my raison d'etre. And but yeah, I first got interested in selenium through farming, because we had a farm on Kangaroo Island and in the hills, and they were selenium deficient, and unless you added it in some manner, you would have trouble with your birth rates of cattle and sheep, and you'd have ill thrift, this sort of thing.
So you said that started in your 40s, so we're talking about a 10, 15, 20-year span in terms of your inquiry, your study?
Well, since then, it depends where you want to start. I started looking at those who I think run the world back in the mid-1980s, so that gave me a grounding. I've probably been looking at it longer than even David Icke has. I haven't written as many books as he has, but then I met certain people who were on the same wavelength as me, and we did write several books on economic, population matters, various things like that, and got onto this business of who actually controls things, and so it goes back a way. But then I got really interested in things like the nutrition, the link between good nutritious agriculture and human health by way of improved nutrition since, say, the year 2000, when I started the PhD, and since then, when I got the PhD, have been working in a number of countries on those subjects, running trials, and but not just research, development as well, promoting some of these foods, which, for example, in the Solomons, orange sweet potato as a means of improving vitamin A level. You wouldn't think people could be deficient in that up there with all the things like mangoes and what have you, but often children can be, and that can lead to eye problems if they get some infectious disease on top. So I enjoyed doing that sort of thing. We ran trials in the middle of China, Colombia, did some work in East Africa, plenty of work here in South Australia, and part of that work was with an organisation called Harvest Plus, based in Washington, DC. And in 2016, the head of that won the World Food Prize, which is it's like the Nobel Prize for Food and Agriculture, and some of that work that he had done was based on my work, so that was probably the pinnacle of my scientific career. But I still, although I'm sort of semi-retired now, I'm still interested in running trials, which I often do at my own home in pots, looking at various plants and what happens when you add certain fertilisers to them, or certain things that people think might extract more phosphorus from the soil. I'm always interested in that. So you've come at this broad topic where we find ourselves today, from a health, nutrition, agricultural. I mean, it's a broad canvas that you've come at it from, not from some conspiracy position. No, not Campbell, and a historical angle. I'm very interested in history, how we got to be where we are, and going back, thousands, 10,000s of years, and it's always interested me. I mean, who wouldn't be interested in that stuff? I'm surprised that more people don't investigate things.
But a lot of people just don't know, do they? I mean, they're not taught that anymore, that sort of background or how we got to where we're at, the school system I'm talking about.
That's true. Well, the education system has been somewhat subverted, shall we say. You know, you hear about the march of the left through the institutions. That was the Marxist.
The goose step of the left.
Yes,
like
that was Gramsci. I think
yes,
it was an Italian Marxist, and it's gone through virtually all our institutions. You know, you look at even some of the big churches, the way they're leaning now, and their governments, our political parties. Look at what happened. Poor old Senator Fioravanti-Wells. She got virtually disendorsed for the next Senate election, so she dumped on Morrison, which I was very happy to see. But that was just part of the agenda about trying to eject anyone who's at all conservative from the Liberal Party, and she certainly is.
Do you see that as an emerging pattern in Australian politics? We're sort of shifting here quickly, but the inability to have a different position from groupthink in a federal, you know, collaboration, which is what the federal government's meant to be, representative of states and different interest groups and so forth. If you have, I'm thinking of Craig Kelly and George Christensen and other people who have been made outliers. I mean, they're rogue senators, aren't they? They're given a label, rogue senators. People don't like to be on the outside, but do you see that as a trend in talking about?
Oh yes, absolutely. I think it's fairly obvious what's happened there. You've got basically Lib Lab is like a duopoly, and if you throw in the Greens, you've got a triopoly. They dominate politics in this country, and it's all moved further to the left, particularly in the last 10 or 15 years.
But you could argue, given your background and your broad the range of interests and topics, that you actually need that sort of input, that sort of thinking from political leaders, not a conformist mindset.
That's right. Conformist mindset is, well, it just ends up in a dictatorship, basically. Some would say we're virtually there. Some would say that we have like a sham democracy, basically. This just voting every 3 or 4 years does not necessarily mean you're in a proper democracy. It's dominated by these political parties. And if you're talking about groupthink, then the party dominates what each of its members thinks, and if they think outside of that, the whip gets onto the quick smart.
The career is brought to a
sudden halt.
Yes.
And look, people like George Christensen and Craig Kelly, Senator Wells, Senator Antic from here, tremendous person.
Gerard
Rennick, he's similar. They, give it, say, 10 years ago, that was the standard conservative view. Now they're painted as being ultra right wing. It shows how far the whole thing has gone to the left, and that means more authoritarianism, leading to something even worse.
Yeah. It's not just a left-right divide anymore. It's really an ideology, almost beyond, to me at least, beyond that. It's a worldview.
Yeah.
I think if you look at it as a continual left-right, it simplifies it too much.
Yes. Well, there's a reason for doing that. Any divide and rule strategy helps the perpetrators, the controllers of all this sort of stuff, and that's just another one. It's the same in pretty well any Anglo country. You've got, say, 2 major parties, and most people, if they're brought up within one of those, will tend to keep voting for them, regardless of what they do to them. And the last 2 years here has been a great example of that. There's been imposition of tyranny in this country, or attempted imposition, by either side of, they may as well have been the other or whatever, but people still keep voting for them, largely. And we saw this in the state election here a week or so ago. They seem to have forgotten what those parties did to them.
So are you making a prediction for the May federal election, is it?
Well, yes, if you want me to. I'll, as much as I dislike the whole system, yes, I think what the Liberals have done at the federal level in enabling each of the state premiers to do what they've done in imposing tyranny, and didn't matter whether they were Liberal or Labor. Mind you, the worst of them were Labor. Look at Andrews in Victoria,
with his strong cities and so forth.
Palaszczuk, yeah, the strong cities story. Palaszczuk in Brisbane, and almost the worst of them all, the state minister in Darwin. What's he?
McGowan.
Yeah, not McGowan. He's in Western Australia.
Oh, sorry, Gunner in Northern Territory.
What are these people called? They're the first minister or something in these territories.
Yes.
What's his name?
Mr. Gunner.
They've all been somewhat similar. We had our own Marshall here. He might have been the more benign of them all, but still allowed all this nonsense to be imposed. And he's now gone, so he's become an irrelevancy. But yes, I don't think there will be a lot of people who don't forgive Morrison for allowing that to take place. He could have stopped that. He was the, you could say, the instigator of that.
So you think there could be a marking of the card in May, if that's...
I think so. I think probably Labor will get in, which is going to make it even worse.
But these people are all actors of a type, aren't they? And you mentioned Marshall, who's now moved on. And is,
yes.
You know,
They've...
And there may be some other changes. Regardless of what the brand is, the ideology that these people seem to be advancing, and most people are not, you know, immediately aware or alert to. You're talking about your journey, which is the last 20 or 30 years, or more perhaps. Most people are saying, well, you know, I'm awake, and that's fantastic. Well, when did you wake up? It's the last year and a half, 2 years. This guy's got about 20 years head start on us. So I can imagine the reading and the books and the reference notes that you have, and we'll get to that a little bit later on. But these people are actors, and you can get a bit fixated with the actors and say, well, I'm upset with Gunner or whomever. But it's what they're collectively bringing to play that concerns me or troubles me.
Yes,
and I'm, you know, I'm on the smart side of, you know, 50, 60 now. So I've been looking at this for 20 or 30 years like you have, and many people have. And we grew up with a political regime in this country which we thought represented our interests. But it seems to me, I mean, the Digital Identity Bill in New Zealand and the UK and now being advanced here, I mean, that is about tracking and monitoring people, and we're losing control of our own data, we're losing control of our own lives, public and private sector transactions, and these people seem to think this is okay. Does that trouble you?
Oh, it troubles me greatly, Campbell, and when, as I've said in a couple of my talks, when my anger and disgust at our so-called leaders starts to boil over, the only way I've got of dealing with it is running up and down Mount Lofty, which I did again last night, and I've put myself in so much pain it leaves no room for anger at these.
So that's stress management.
I'll try not to use the expletive I was going to use. Yeah, it's stress management. And no, you were asking, yes, or you're saying they're actors, but what is the play they're acting in? Or what is the pantomime?
Well, who wrote that? Who's the Shakespeare here? Do we have a view on who wrote the script?
Well, it depends how far you want to go back. There's a group of people who now we're getting into the territory where I run the risk of being labelled a nutter, but unfortunately you've got to face this if you're really going to get to the heart of it. And there's actually a lot of information out there about these particular people. Some argue they're not even people. I don't think I'm in that category, but goes back a long way, thousands of years.
But most people now are familiar with WEF and CFR and other groups who are agencies or institutions, if you like. And I think you're suggesting that there are people even behind that layer. That's their fronts or their intermediaries, if you will. And there's another group of people who have some agenda. You know, most people are aware of Agenda 2130, but we're talking about an ideological agenda behind that. Yeah, is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, that's right. If the most benign term for them, which Ethan Nash of TOTT News, I think is a great organisation. I'm a member.
Good work.
Yeah, it's a very good alternative news platform based in Brisbane. He's studied them greatly, and he calls them controllers. That's a very benign term. I call them global parasites. And because they've
Tell us what you really think.
Yeah. Well, I can't come up with another term that I'm happy with apart from that. because they've parasitised the rest of humanity throughout their generations of their existence, and they go back to Babylon, Sumer.
Yeah.
There's another. You've got
there's a pattern here.
There's a pattern. The Khazaria story, you know that one, the Khazarian mafia.
Yeah.
There's a lot of reading. If people want to delve into this, there are actually a lot of books have been written on it. It's not as if it's so esoteric you can't find the information, or it's only in the brains of people like us, and we can be labelled. 13th Tribe, you've got, in more recent times, you've got Tragedy and Hope by Professor Carol Quigley of Georgetown University, who was actually hired by them to write the history going back maybe 150 years.
And then the lights went on.
Yes, the lights went on. Oh, he was too meticulous in his research, and he pretty well late, and he thought what they were doing was good, leading to the world government, which would end wars. He was naive. Very good historian, but naive, as a lot of academics are.
Don't you find that interesting, though? Because a lot of really intelligent, so-called intelligent people with a learned intelligence, be they lawyers or academics, are actually quite naive in some of this material, some of this space. They're not really thinking through, not joining the dots, and it's hard to talk with them because they have a intellectual position which is quite fixed.
Yeah, I've really noticed this, Campbell. The scientific background I came from, none of those people, I could name about one or two people who've actually stood up.
Yeah, they don't stand up, do they?
No, against what we've seen imposed on us here in the last 2 years, and you know, the whole pandemic story has got so many holes in it that surely anyone with functioning neurons could see that the bloody thing's
like
a hoax.
Identity Bill, short name that I use. I think one of the things that's going on here is this digital dystopia, you call it. Is that where you see this thing heading in the next? I mean, Agenda 2130, that's part of it. The WEF is very, very strong on this. And if you go on the WEF site, WEF, World Economic Forum, they actually articulate very clearly what their intentions are. And this is starting to get pretty. They're very brazen about it, aren't they?
Oh yes,
they're very clear about it now.
Oh, true.
They must think they're winning.
Oh yes, they think they are, but they're not necessarily. I think they'll ultimately fail, and because
there's 7 billion of us, isn't there?
That's right.
700 of them.
No, they're trying to knock that down fairly rapidly using their quacks, as I call it.
There was that. I think it was a TED talk by Bill Gates about 4 or 5, 6 years ago, perhaps. And he was talking about how vaccines can be used. And there's about 300 people in the room. And I was watching this and other people were watching it. And he talks about how if vaccines are applied correctly, it could help reduce the world's population by 15%.
Yes.
And everybody clapped. And I remember pausing the tape and going, did I just hear him say it would reduce it 15%? I thought vaccines were meant to save lives.
Yes.
Have I missed something?
I heard that too, Campbell. Of course, they would explain it away by saying because in a continent like Africa, we will improve their health with these vaccines, and they won't need to have so many children. Because
it was a demographic.
Yes, that's what he would argue there, but I would argue that it was exactly what he meant.
Yes.
We want to kill off much of the world's population. You've got to look at his pedigree. His father was the head of Planned Parenthood, which was a eugenics program, still is. And look at Boris Johnson. His father, Stanley's a shocker. He's a eugenicist. Or they call themselves Malthusians. You know, Thomas Malthus talking about the greatly rising population which will outstrip the food supply. Look, the way the
you're talking like that, and we're in a cafe, say, and the next table over hears us, all these people watching, and they say, the guy's a nutcase.
Who's this nutter?
Yeah, adjust your hat here.
Yes, can we move tables?
Yes. So what's the danger then? Is it? It's not whether someone wears a mask or not. It's some sort of enforced compliance and people losing their own identity, digital identity. That's why that troubles me, because it's the abrogation of your identity. It's the forfeiting of your identity, and you know, you're suggesting that these are conditioning points, control mechanisms. I mean, you mentioned controllers before. Is it?
They're masters.
They're baby steps towards a controller.
Yes, exactly. No, you've got it. They have these, they call them nudge units. It's just, I find it very, what's the word? Just horrible the way they've done this. It's a psychological attack on the population, and they've hired people who are experts in this. I'm talking about governments.
Well, they brought one, a chap from New South Wales brought one expert in nudging from the UK to Sydney and works with the New South Wales government. For those who don't know, nudge units are basically propaganda PR departments who work with clinical psychologists and so forth to actually massage, to nudge the population from point A along a journey path towards the desired outcome at point B.
That's right.
Yeah. So the suggestion there is that it's not a significant step; they're just micro steps. They're nudges. And so it's the boiling frog.
That's right.
It's the boiling frog scenario, isn't it?
Well, it goes back quite a way. Edward Bernays was, I think, the first person who started studying this in a formal manner, and they've been perpetrating this on the population. Sometimes they take more than a baby step. Sometimes they take a pretty big jump and shock,
and then bring it back.
That's what we saw 2 years ago. And the badge of obedience is the face snapping. I've seen it that way from the start, and that one of the keys to this is just not complying. But it takes a little bit of courage initially, and can get you in uncomfortable situations at times. But unless you wish to be gradually moved into this digital dystopia where you will become a slave, this is what you've got to do.
On the digital plantation.
Slave on a digital plantation. That was, as Patrick Henningsen, the great journalist, described it, who I watch often on UK Column and 21st Century Wire. Which leads to another thing. You've got to do your own research. You've obviously done plenty, Campbell. Those people who think, how could I describe it, that reading the Weekend Australian or the Australian makes them a lot more sophisticated than someone reading the local rag, and they'll get all the news they need. They'll be sadly disillusioned when it's drummed home to them that they're not being told the truth on so many things. They're all controlled by these, talk about the mass media.
So that's an interesting point, because my observations is over the last 2 years, or more perhaps, but certainly over the last 2 years, people in this country have become less and less convinced and trusting of media, government, education, the church, perhaps even their family. There's been fractures and divisions in families. And we can even add into that economy now, which is employers, where you were a trusted employer for X years and then quickly released. In Victoria, they had a demonstration recently from hero to zero for the frontline workers. They were loved and adored last year, and now they're being terminated. So that really does something to people, where if they have a sense of identity in their work, or in their church perhaps, and that's all then fractured and diminished.
True.
What do they then? Who do they turn to? What do they then rely on? Because it seems to me that this country, that there's a lot of people, 25 million or thereabouts. A lot of people would be going, well, what do I believe in now? What do I trust in? Where do I go with this?
That's right. There's so many people have had a naive, misplaced faith in governments and the media, and if they still have that, I'm not sure there's much hope for them. But those who are, as you say, questioning this, or and have lost faith in these institutions which have been utterly corrupted, where do they turn? There are a number of, shall we call them, parallel communities already being set up. We've got several here in Adelaide, and helping people who've been fired for not taking the death shot, and food provision, where to next, people of like mind who know what's going on and know what is coming. There are various groups. There's some excellent ones up in
But
Queensland.
we're talking a very small percentage of people, though. What would you suggest? What would you suggest happens for people? Where do they go if they're feeling a little bit disillusioned with the world that we're living in? They can do their own research. You're suggesting?
Well, it depends where you are, whether you're a bien pensant or, to use a more derogatory term, a sheeple. 2030, that's the agenda. By then, they expect to have people enmeshed in this matrix of a digital dystopia. Beyond trying to sugarcoat this is what the agenda is. Various names for this. Some call it neoliberal fascism. Some call it techno-fascism. I quite like that one. So you've got some very good commentators for those who are interested in learning more about this. Patrick Wood is very good. He learnt his trade under Professor Anthony Sutton back in the 1970s. First started looking at the rise of the technocratic class. Technocracy. We've almost seen supplant the so-called sham democracy, it has been for a long time, has almost been supplanted in this country and the whole Anglosphere by a technocracy. Look at the way these so-called public health officials who wouldn't know a genuine disease if it leapt up and hit them in the face. They're just reading the Gates WHO Big Pharma script. They're technocrats. They've been running this country since, February 2020. And the parliaments have been virtually put out of business, firstly by Morrison, then by each state premier. And so that then morphs, according to Patrick Wood and numerous other commentators, under the aegis of something called scientism. Probably getting a bit too technical for some people, but this stuff needs to be known. Scientism is the religion of pseudoscience. So when you get people like Anthony Fauci...
So follow the science is scientism.
Follow the science is generally, they're talking about people following the pseudoscience.
And I can't be wrong because I'm science.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, totally.
And I can't be wrong because I'm science and I'm God.
Yeah, that's right. Well, that's Fauci is
the domino theory.
Yeah, he's just a puppet of these big pharma, which itself is a weapon of the controllers that I'm talking about. Most of whom prefer to stay in the shadows, but they're incredibly wealthy. They own probably more than half the world's wealth in their just a handful of people, possibly 2/3. And so they can buy virtually anyone they want, anyone who hasn't got a decent spiritual centre and true morals, they won't buy them.
All right. So what are the next, in the next 3 years, say, do you have some indicators that people should be looking for? I mean, this is all playing out in the background. These guys are hidden. There are fronts like WEF and so on. But we do see, I mean, over time, if you look back and you go, wow, that's happened and that's happened and that's happened, you start to string of pearls, you join them together. But what would be the things that we should be looking for going forward, do you think?
Well, you'll be looking at things like new property taxes, part of the 23rd, or the WEF, Klaus Schwab. You know, his history goes back to the Nazis. His father was a Nazi. And he's got a history which he would prefer not to have made public. Not a nice man. And goes back to the IG Farb and stuff, you name it. Anyway, he's always saying, yes, you'll have nothing, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. Well, they'll achieve that by various means, or try to achieve it. One of them will be a tax on unrealised capital gains. So watch out for that one. And where we get a Labor government in federal parliament.
Unrealised capital gains.
Unrealised capital gains, a 20% tax.
Do you get a refund for unrealised capital losses? Does it
No, probably not.
Oh,
probably not. No, well, if they keep on their inflationary trends, you'll always get a capital gain if you own property. But all that means is that the value of the dollar is going down, and they've done that deliberately, and they're doing it to all the fiat currencies. So watch out for that. 20% tax, unrealised capital gains. So they'll apply that on you every year until you can't own your property anymore. So that will be one means of trying to do that.
Is this because they can't fund the welfare?
Oh, that's part of it, but they've engineered that deliberately. Of course, it's all very well thought out a long time ago. It's not just an ad hoc arrangement by these governments. They're doing what they're told. as you said before, they're puppets.
Well, I know you have a newfound faith, which is terrific. One of my favourite, probably my favourite scripture in the whole Bible is the love of money is the root of all evil, because I think it explains just about everything. The love of money is the root of all evil. So I find it surprising that people would be not aware of these sort of orchestrations, because it is being orchestrated, as you say,
right.
and it has been over the last 20 to 30 years. This is a long game. They're playing a long game here, right?
Long game. Yeah.
So money, you said half or 2/3 of the wealth of the world. You've got plenty of asset and resource to leverage position, and that's what's going on. You've got a crop of people coming through, like Jacinda Ardern, for example, who was trained and has been good.
Infiltrators.
And I'm not making a comment about her capacity or motivations, but there are lots of people. Half of Trudeau's government, for example, were WEF graduates. So these people are in position, and there's a lot of money at play. So when you talk to someone, and you must get thrown out of a lot of dinner parties where they say,
I don't even get invited.
Don't even get invited. It's got that bad.
Lost most of my old friends, Campbell.
But when you start to talk like this, and people go, yeah, but the love of money is the root. It's a very powerful tool. So why would you think this isn't happening? It's naive in the extreme, right? So there are some indicators there we should be aware of. You're talking about the tax. What else? I mean, the mortality rates. Are we looking?
Well, yes, they've risen massively since the push out of
at least 15% in Scotland, I'm told, and up to 40% somewhere in the US and the
Yes, the insurers, the life insurers, who keep a very close tab of this sort of thing.
Yeah.
That's how they
For
get
good
their
reason.
income. Yeah. Their actuaries are very well trained to in this sort of data. They found an increase of plus 40% over and above what they would expect.
How does this get disguised? Because, you know, at the moment, this is not really being talked about, as you say, in the media.
No, that's right. Well, it's a reflection of who owns the media, the fact that the media is up to its neck in this, governments are up to their necks in it.
I was told the other day in a news report that one of the reasons the death rate is going up is because people are having heart problems from winding their clock back.
Yeah.
I mean, that was what was published.
Well,
or not warming up, the soccer players, they're not warming up properly before the game.
Oh, yeah. This is the sort of stuff.
Global warming?
Global warming. So I'm dismayed and disgusted by the medical profession as a whole. I'm not afraid to say that. But there's a few notable exceptions who have stood up, and they're brave, and some have been deregistered already. Others are under threats of it. But the organisations which control them, APRA, the AMA, then there's a TARGI, the TGA, which okays all the drugs at the behest of Big Pharma. They're paid by Big Pharma. So they're captured regulators. 50% of the FDA budget in the US comes from Big Pharma. Yeah.
The groups they're meant to regulate.
That's
So
right.
how is that not a conflict of interest?
Exactly. It sounds like you've been reading The Real Anthony Fauci by Robert Kennedy Jr. It's detailed in tremendous detail there, 2,200 references. And the abominations committed by Big Pharma and Fauci, going back a long way. Fauci was actually heavily involved in the whole AIDS story, the HIV/AIDS story.
Way back in the 80s, yeah.
Yes, from the start of the 80s. And again, that was one where they never characterised an actual virus. You know, most people think I'm a nutter when I say this.
Conversation by how you went on your journey of, you know, academic, gaining academic knowledge and investigation and research and so on. So Graham clearly has an inquiring mind and an intellectual capacity, but most people, as you say, you know, think they're informed if they read the Australian as opposed to the local rag. Yeah. But there's a lot of data, there's a lot of information, there are a lot of websites, there are a lot of blogs, there's a lot of information to glean, and you need to weigh it up and do your own research. But don't accept the conversation and the discussion that says, oh, well, that's misinformation, because largely it isn't.
No, that's right. Do you want me to name any of these sources?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well,
go ahead, I'll finish.
Some of the ones I find really good are UK Column, COLUMN. They have a news bulletin 3 days a week. Top journalist Patrick Henningsen appears on a Friday. Alex Thomson, who is absolutely brilliant. He's a strong Christian. He used to work for MI6 until he saw the evil stuff they were doing. on behalf of these controllers. MI6 does not work for the UK government, for example. It's works for those controllers, and but they ostensibly work for the government. They don't. People like that, you've got to take notice of. They've done tremendous research. They're not backed by any evil, moneyed organisation pushing an agenda.
They don't have a conflict of interest.
No conflict of interest. You've got 21st Century Wire. That's Patrick Henningsen's website. It's very good. The Health Ranger, Mike Adams, with his situation updates from Texas just about every day. He's right on most things. He predicted this depopulation agenda about a decade ago. In fact, he was talking with Alex Jones on an interview, I think it could be 2011 or something like that. And of course, they were ridiculed, but now it's coming to pass. You've got the Corbett Report, James Corbett, brilliant guy. He's based in Japan. You've got the Delingpod. James Delingpole used to be, you could say, an orthodox conservative journalist. He still often writes for The Spectator, but he had an epiphany at least a year ago. He saw behind the facade of, what he'd been involved in, and now it comes right out. He's had some of the best interviews I've heard. Dr. Christiane Northrup, brilliant woman from Maine in the USA.
She's very good.
Yeah, she's been a clinician for about 40 years. She knows about all this agenda, speaks beautifully. Another strong Christian.
It's interesting just to finish on this, that a lot of these people do have a faith, and it goes back to my question before, searching for truth, searching for meaning, searching for real ethical value points. And a lot of people with faith are actually doing that because it's been laid bare. And they're going, well, that's not true. I've got the confidence to pursue it, perhaps. Whereas a lot of other people might say, well, it's too hard, it's too threatening. Cognitive dissonance, I'm shutting down.
You're right, you've got it. And on the musical side, Van Morrison, he's a man of faith, always has been, strong Northern Irishman. And so, yes, when I was at uni for, 22 years doing all this research, I thought I was a clever atheist. Who needs this nonsense of religion? There's no God out there. What rubbish. Read the Richard Dawkins book, The God Delusion, with great relish, and thought I could explain everything in terms of evolution, Darwinian. And but gee, I've had a big wake-up call. When this, I've got Corona to thank for this. I've actually stepped beyond that. I think so.
But that's why I mean this is
some strength.
This is not a left-right thing. This has a spiritual. This has a spiritual underbelly, and it has that sort of texture to it, if that's the word. Where as you start to engage the points and the things that are being presented, you start to realise this is not political. It's not. I mean, there is a political spirit in it.
Oh, there is.
But there's much more, and that's why I find it interesting, and it is interesting that people are actually starting to. But people with faith and with conviction are coming through and actually making the inquiry. A lot of other people are shutting down. The point that I'd like to make in closing is that when people criticise commentators like Graham and other people for misinformation or being conspiratorial, you just need to look at your track record in terms of research, writing, data collection, conversations, associates, affiliates, and so on. That's not ad hoc. That's not just a month or 2 or 3 months or 6 months. That's a long period of time. And so you gain an accumulation of knowledge and understanding of a topic to give you a confident point to speak from. And so we can all learn from that, because we need to keep learning, we need to keep gathering, and some people are shutting down, some people are not. So that's why we want to have this conversation, Graham, because we need to be encouraged, all of us, to go on that journey, to make that inquiry. You started 40 years ago, perhaps.
Getting on to that now.
And close to, and still learning. And I was saying to someone just yesterday, you never stop learning, and you don't want to stop learning.
Absolutely. And you've enunciated the way a genuine scientist should operate. Gradually be a truth seeker, gradually build on the knowledge you have, expect to be debunked. That's what Popper, Popper, the philosopher of science, said, you put up a hypothesis, but you then expect someone to work away to try and debunk that and come up with a better one. You know, I've been waiting for that with some of my selenium stuff for some years. I'm sick of seeing stuff. They still send me through articles to review, and sick of seeing ones that just reiterate what I've done some time ago. I want to see someone come up with something better than mine. I wouldn't try and silence them. That's what people like Fauci, what have you, will do. They won't debate in public. Never debate Kennedy, because he knows Kennedy would wipe the floor with it. Kennedy's a brilliant guy.
It has to be an ongoing inquiry. So we'll thank Graham for being with us today. Thank you, Graham.
Pleasure. Thank you, Campbell.
And
Thank you for having me.
Put some references in the links below, and you can look at books and material which might help you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Campbell. Thanks for having me.